Hello and welcome to Planet Poetry. My name's Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. And in this episode we meet Tishani Doshi, whose book A God at the Door was published by Blood Axe in 2021.
Plus, Peter has been exploring the potential of Chat GPT and how soon AI will replace poets. Shock, horror. But as an antidote to that, I've been reading an extraordinary book which gives Roman poet Catullus a postmodern makeover.
But before all that, let's hear what Tishani Doshi had to say to Robin.
Tishani Doshi publishes poetry, fiction and essays. For 15 years, she worked as the lead dancer of the Chandralekha Company in Madras, India, performing on stages all across the world. And as such, the body has been a central preoccupation in her work. Her debut, Countries of the Body, won the Forward Prize for Best First Collection in 2006. Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, 2017, headlined the All About Women Festival at the Sydney Opera House and was shortlisted for a Ted Hughes Award. Her novels, The Pleasure Seekers, 2010, and Small Days and Nights, 2019, have been shortlisted for the Hindu Fiction Prize, the Tata Fiction Award, and the RSL Ondaatje Prize. A God at the Door, her most recent collection of poems, was shortlisted for the Forward Poetry Prize, 2021. She is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and an Associate Professor of Literature and Creative Writing at New York University, Abu Dhabi. Tishani Doshi, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Tell us where you are on the planet right now.
So I am at a university campus of New York University in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. I teach here in the fall semester.
And then the rest of the year?
The rest of the year I live on a rural isolated beach in Tamil Nadu in South India, where it would be much more difficult for you and I to have this conversation because the internet is very shaky there.
I had to ask you that because I did read in your bio that you live on some kind of dreamy beach with all your dogs and it all looks gorgeous.
It is gorgeous. It can be rough, but it's very beautiful.
So today we're going to talk about your most recent collection, 2021, A God at the Door. I'm just going to quote a little bit of the blurb on the back because we read here that Tishani Doshi's poetry bestows power on the powerless, deploys beauty to heal trauma, and enables the voices of the oppressed to be heard with piercing clarity. It's clear to me reading this collection that you're very much concerned with the world of today and the injustices, particularly injustices against women. And yet there is this spirituality and timelessness about your writing. Is that fair to say?
Yes. I'm always interested in the question of time and history and being. And it seems that for me, the lyric aspect of poetry, which is a kind of presentness and aliveness of the self in the world, demands to take into account where we are, what is happening, what are the issues we are facing at the moment. But it's also kind of urging an out of time, out of body, out of space, hovering above time almost, in that sense of striving for timelessness, yet speaking to the time. COVID was a really, those years of the pandemic were really strange and changed our notions of our body in time and space. And I think all of us felt that. And I really feel that the poems that emerged tried more and more to do that. And especially because a lot of the poems were responses to news articles. This language of the news, which can be deadening, which can cover up, which can deflect, which can be very euphemistic.
Yeah.
And yet I feel like in some way I was quite inspired by stories that I read in the news at the time.
there was that sense of time almost standing still.
Yeah.
So perhaps that was a great time for introspection and trying to work out what exactly we were hearing in the news. I think to take us into your world, perhaps you could start by introducing and reading the poem that's entitled, I Found a Village and in it were all our missing women.
This came about reading a couple of news articles. One was that in 2019, I read that 21 million Indian women had been denied the right to vote because their names were not registered on voting lists. 21 million is the size of Sri Lanka, the whole country. It's a lot of people. And it's just like, I was also obviously thinking about how women are vanished in much more brutal and horrible ways. But this was also a vanishing because, the right to vote, citizenship, to be engaged in all of that, for that to be removed is a kind of taking away of existence. And then I had read another story about how in a particular district in the state of Maharashtra, 4,600 women who were sugarcane cutters had to undergo hysterectomies so that they wouldn't miss any day of work. So this poem came about from those articles. I found a village, and in it were all our missing women. I found a village, and in it were all our missing women, holding guns to the heads of birds. They'd heard the voting had begun, that it had been going on for years without them. They knew their sisters had been bribed with gas cylinders and bicycles, that even grandmas grabbed bags of rice in exchange for the ballot. They showed no resentment, left all their gold to the descendants of a Mongolian war princess with whom they shared a minor percent of DNA. I found a village, a republic, the size of a small island country with a history of autogenic massacre. In it were all our missing women. They'd been sending proof of their existence, copies of birth and not quite dead certificates to offices of the registrar. What they received in response was a rake and a cobweb in a box. The rake was used to comb the sugarcane fields for wombs lost in accidental hysterectomies. The cobweb box became an installation to represent the curious feeling of sitting backward on a train, of life pulling away from you, even as you long to surge ahead. They were not fatalistic, could say apocalyptic fatigue and extinction crisis in quick succession after several rounds of Mai Tais. I found a village with a sacred tree shot free of all its refugees, in whose branches our missing women had hung colored passport photos of themselves. Now listen. A woman is not a bird or chick or anything with wings, but a woman knows the sound of wind and how it moves its massive thighs against your skin, the sound of house swallowed by sinkhole, crater, tunnel, quicksand, quake, the collective whoosh of a disappearing, the way a gun might miss its target, the way 21 million might just vanish.
I'm struck by the way you tell stories. This seems to be a common thing in many of the poems. You're able to swing between the factual detail and dreamlike occurrences. You pack so much in. This phrase, the rake was used to comb the sugarcane fields for wombs lost in accidental hysterectomies, is a lot to unpack. Reading the book, I was having to read poems several times, and even then thinking, my brain's going to explode in a minute with everything that's in here, and it's beautiful phrasing, and we're sort of lulled by it, but obviously there's this tightly controlled anger. It's so powerful, that combination, and that phrase, the collective whoosh of disappearing. I think we've got a whoosh somewhere else coming up.
Possibly.
Is it fair to say that you aim for this to get the point across?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I think it's so funny. I haven't written a poem in many months now, and it's always interesting to me going back to something that I've written and think, I wrote that? Interesting. How did I do that? Because I feel far from poetry at the moment, unfortunately. So it's very nice exercise for me to also re-enter what goes on. And I think I'm really interested in texture in a poem, if that makes sense.
Mm,
These leaps, these synapses that suddenly take you from here to a train, that you're traveling backwards on a train and seeing your life and trying to catch up with it,
yeah, yeah,
and it's interesting to me because obviously there's something in the brain that works and something about poetry that lends itself to making these leaps and to putting things together and juxtaposing things that you wouldn't ordinarily think of, and in somehow doing that, and sometimes it might even be jarring, you create a kind of new vision. And I think it has to do with vision and being able to see something in a different way. And so you're trying to do that with language, of course. And I think also because it's poetry, you're trying to do that with sound. It's like trying to create that sense of wind, that sense of vanishing. I think poems are quite extraordinary for their smallness, and yet they're able to contain so much,
yeah,
so like you said, you go back, you read the poem again, something else opens up, there's another little window, another little turning that you missed the first time around. And I love complicated ideas, and I like complicated poems, not just for the sake of being complex, but I think people are complex. And I think poems that try to dig in and gather that up and try to mold something from that process interests me.
yeah.
And so, yeah, imagery is really important in being able to sort of go from this one image to the other to the other, and how do you string them along.
Yeah. And certainly something unusual about you, I don't think I've interviewed a poet before who combines dance with poetry. And when I first read this, I was trying to sort of figure out what kind of dance are we talking about. And then I watched a YouTube performance that you did of The Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, which is your previous collection,
Yeah.
wasn't it? And this is this fierce performance. I was quite terrified by it, actually. I would say it's more a kind of physical expression to music, I suppose, while the recording of you reading the poem is happening. Just extraordinary combination, and it was very powerful. Is that something you're still involved in? Are you still dancing in that way?
Yes, I am. I come back to dance after a few years. I'm not actually working with text at the moment. It's just music and movement. It's very slow. It's like an unfolding. My practice or background has been, I would say, yoga is the main base, but also some martial art and some elements of Indian dance. In the same way that with poetry, we talk a lot about the blank space, the white space around the
Hmm.
words, the places and areas of breath where we kind of build in breath into the poem. I think I'm really interested in the idea of stillness with dance, how very, very slow and small movements can seem to be very, very large just by tempo, just by changing rhythm. And so it's not just leaps and bounds and dynamism
No.
and all of this, but actually you could just plant your feet on the ground like I do for Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. And my feet don't ever move, but the rest of my body moves. And through that stillness, what kind of movement can you generate? What kind of force? What kind of power? So I've always felt that those two disciplines of mine really work together very well, because ultimately we are talking about the same things, about time, about breath, about space, about the self and its relationship to the environment outside, this micro macro
Mm,
scale.
mm.
And all of that to me is channeled through the body.
And that's very interesting. Yeah. Then what you said about the connection with yoga in your
Yes.
dance, just standing up and reading one's poems, how much of that is to do with the breath and the embodiment of the emotion of the poem, if you like, inside the body. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And I always watch when poets read, they always tap their feet a little bit if they're standing up. Like I feel like their foot, it's a keeping of time, or they'll move a little bit. Everybody does it. They know their rhythm, they know their tempo, and their poem is to their tempo. And so I think all poets are dancers in some way.
They just don't know it.
They don't know it. Yeah.
The second poem I'd like you to read is the ekphrastic poem, Tiger Woman.
Okay. So this is after a 19th century Mughal painting of two men who are in pursuit of a tiger woman. So above the water, she's in a lake. Above the water, she has the face of a woman, and below, she's a tiger. Tiger Woman. No one writes poems for the handsome sidekick who barely makes the frame, there to collect his master's clothes by the river. He has seen those creamy, solid thighs 1,000 times, knows what lies behind the shrubs of pink, body bags, flies. You would rather hear about the woman, the chimera beneath. You want to know what the air was like that febrile day, how the sun crafted a way to shine upon her fan of hair. I understand. You would rather talk about the things only you can see. The tiger paws, the tail, a body transformed underwater. But if you listen to the sidekick, he can tell you why all the old cities made fortresses of themselves, how those soft green mounds evocative of breaths should have been painted as ruined blocks of apartments instead. You do not get to have an empire without squashing someone else. Lean in and he will tell you how the summer hunts are so frequent. Even the heap of muslin on the bank is overcome with sweat. Even the cicadas who are sawing the afternoon in half seem to be signaling a threat. On this occasion, the tiger woman escapes, but the sidekick knows eventually the body fails. How many times has he found himself dreaming of bird feet and a plumed tail, some way to take flight? You see, the river is sweet and brims with carp, but the water's edge is skin, stained with curses and blood sacrifices. In one part of the world, something is always blooming. No amount of washing takes the smell off him.
Thank you. I looked this picture up. I had to sort of take a double take that it was painted, in the 19th century, or actually not that long ago anyway, but it has this kind of archaic look to it. And right center, this tiger with the woman's head, and all they can see is the head, but we can see the body. And I love the way you've taken the point of view of the manservant, because you can take the viewer out of themselves, and you've managed to very skillfully foreground the parallels with how women are often regarded even in the present day.
Yeah. When I saw the painting for the first time, it's a miniature, so it's quite small. And obviously, your eye is on this creature, this part woman, part tiger. I loved the form of it. And initially, I thought I would write it about her and about, from her perspective. But then I saw this little figure on the side of the frame where even half of him is out of it.
Yeah.
And I was interested in that person at the corner of the frame and what might his perspective be and what is he looking at. And I think that sometimes we have all these things in our heads that we are concerned about and these issues, and I didn't think that the poem was going to turn into something a little darker, but it did. And so I think in a way you just follow where the poem leads you. And there was something about her escaping this time around, but we don't know about the next time, and suddenly this very bucolic scenery starts to be tinged with a kind of more ominous feeling, you know?
Yeah, and you're right back to the woman's body, aren't you? You reference the hills as breasts, and then the fact that the water's edge is the skin, and we've got the mention of curses and blood sacrifices, and it's sort of the woman tamed and exotic and crazy and waiting to be tamed by man. And it reminded me also of those portraits in a lot of English country houses of their owners down the ages, sometimes with a little black servant that's kind of wearing a collar or something. And we had Seni Senivaratne on the podcast recently, and she's written a sequence of poems about a number of these portraits, and the fact that these little boys were status symbols, and bringing them forward, I think, is really effective.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting because we are looking at the role of watching and witnessing, and who is seeing what and who is judging what. In a different age, maybe those boy servants or those child servants in those portraits, nobody thought about twice, and their vision was different because they looked at things differently. And now we look at things differently, and we are saying, hey, what's that story? Similarly, in terms of this sort of portrait, what is the role of the aider and the abettor? What is the role of not the main villain, but the wingman guy?
Yeah.
You know, in this situation, it's the man who's collecting his master's clothes. It didn't have to be ominous. It's just that probably that was the mood in which I wrote the poem. But there was this sense of the hunt.
Yes.
There definitely was the sense of the hunt, and tigers have been hunted. So, you know, it was this sense of also an ecological poem in a way. We don't really see that devastation always out in the open. So there's a hiddenness to it. We know that land is continually taken and built upon over other people's houses, for instance. And so it's this question of what is under the water. What are the histories? What are the secrets?
You mentioned you're interested in the shape of a poem or the container of a poem, and there are some shape poems in the book, aren't there? Is it at all for control or boundaries in your writing? We've had poets who've said to us before that actually they see form as, rather than a constraint, actually it creates a freedom.
I think form, obviously, it is a constraint in some way, but it's a very creative challenge for a poet to work with form. Often the poem demands a kind of form, so I would be working on something and it's not sounding right. And then if I create a form, it suddenly comes to life. In terms of the shape poems, it was really a discovery of these wonderful, what they call picture poems in Sanskrit, Chitrakavya. Again, a wonderfully old tradition of clever poems that did all kinds of things. You could read it left to right, up to down, diagonally, and they made all these shapes and they had all these meters. And of course, Sanskrit had the ability and the elasticity in a way that English is quite different and doesn't work always so well. But I was very interested in the idea of a poem also attending to its visual shape on the page, and how that can also work as a container in the way that a sonnet or a sestina or any other kind of form holds the poem. So I have a poem in here which is in the shape of Speedos. And it's just like, okay, once I had the poem and I thought, oh my God, of course it has to be the shape of Speedos. And it's obviously a very tiny poem because it's Speedos. And I think that I really had a lot of fun working with the form. It's just to do with the imagination. And I think that the poem has a way to exist on so many levels. When you speak it out aloud, of course, nobody can see the shape. But when it's in the book, it has this other life in this other form.
Well, you mentioned sestinas, and you're going to read us a sestina now, I think. When I was researching about you and your work, this poem seems to be one of the most reproduced. It's got a striking title, "We will not kill you, we will just shoot you in the vagina." I shall let you introduce it and read it.
Yeah. So this is a direct quote. I read an article in The Guardian about the Filipino president, Rodrigo Duterte, who in 2018 had ordered soldiers to shoot female communist rebels in the vagina. And that's what he said. We will not kill you. We'll just shoot you in the vagina. And then saying that, without their vaginas, women would be useless. And I was obviously shocked by that. And it echoed for me a lot of statements that Indian politicians have been making continuously in various different forms. One said that, you should keep your daughter at home like a new car so that she won't get scratched. And, another one, this is a sort of village leader in Haryana who basically blame the consumption of chow mein and fast food for hormonal imbalances and creating incidents of rapes. And the issue of rape
It's
is so
dreadful.
is so horrible and vicious. And then you have people, men, saying these things, and it's absurd,
Yeah,
it's ludicrous, it makes you laugh, and then accept it's just not funny. And I
exactly.
think I think in a way you just sort of think, what am I to do with this? How do people in positions of power get away with saying things like this? And so the poem came out of a rage for sure. But again, there was this sense of, what do I do? And the Sistina really offered me a chance to deepen that sense of absurdity. At least I hope that was what I was going for. We will not kill you. We'll just shoot you in the vagina. It's true. We're useless without our vaginas. How will you rape us? How will we birth daughters and sons? I understand. We should laugh. It would be better if we did, Mr. Duterte. In India, our leaders say eating chow mein excites the hormones, which provokes rape. And if you can't prevent it, may as well enjoy it. Rape. In one of your 120 languages, the word for vagina is bisong, which sounds like a headlong bird, not chow mein, which good mothers don't feed their daughters for fear of provoking. Mr. Duterte, may I call you Rodrigo? We should laugh. O'Keeffe did when they said she painted vulvas. Laughed. Her flowers didn't wear jeans or stay out late. Rape doesn't happen to respected ladies. Dirty Duterte, Baba Echo, what do you have against vaginas? What about Sarah and Veronica, your daughters, and their drama queen vaginas? What about chow mein? Personally, I'm against MSG, FGM, and chow mein. In Hindi, one of India's 780 languages, I laugh, not to be competitive, but we'd win. The word for daughter is beti. Do you know how many lost daughters, raped, unborn, disappeared? One longs for a Venus flytrap vagina or yoni, the most delectable word for cunt. Duterte, Harry, P-Rod, P-Diggy, Digong, Rodi, Duterte, is Viagra your excellency's version of chow mein? Who dares call you impotent? You who want vagina shot at. You who smooch factory workers. You who laugh and say, as long as there are beautiful girls, there will be rape. There is always a beautiful Beti, daughter. Our leaders warn us to keep our daughters at home like cars so they won't get scratched. Mr. Duterte, they tell us to call our rapist brother while they rape us, and afterward everyone can go out for chow mein because nobody agrees to do it on the first try. Laugh. Mr. President, we have teeth in our rebel vaginas, and they don't need chow mein. Our vaginas have learned to shoot. They laugh and talk back, rapacious beasts. Our daughters feed them poems, Mr. Duterte.
I love that you wrote this as a sestina. It seems to me that the repeated words just grow the irony and the rage really throughout the poem. As you say, you want to laugh, but it's dreadful. So how do you respond to it?
How do we write about violence? How do we convert it? How do we reclaim some kind of power or voice? And I mean, I don't know that I have the answer, but I know that for myself, to be able to write this kind of riposte, this talking back to all of these, to any of these leaders who are saying these things, it's a way to reclaim something and to expose the ridiculousness. And you're right, the sestina is it's a difficult form in many ways because, those words keep coming around, those 6 words, and you think, oh my gosh, I have to do something else with this word. I can't just use it in the same way in every stanza. And in a way, to choose a very strong word like vagina or rape and to keep coming back at that it just deepens the poem, and I think it creates this strange power of almost the meaninglessness with which these things are said. Also, I think at the end, I needed to be the one to retain power at the end of the poem, and to say that, yes, our vaginas have learned we're going to shoot you,
I felt through the book there were poems of rage, of wanting to somehow draw attention to the things that go on. But I feel like any bitterness is held in check. And there always seems to be some kind of a hope, or like you say about planting your feet on the ground when you were doing the dance for The Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. It's that sense of, your feet are on the ground, and the reader feels that as well. I don't come away from this book feeling helpless and hopeless,
I hope not. Yeah, I mean, I think that poetry is ultimately a very optimistic act, because you're writing something and you are creating something, and that thing holds a space, and it's converting something. And I do believe that when we are writing, it's very important to be able to accommodate a very vast emotional palette. So for me, humor is really important. It's become increasingly so, because I just think this idea of the laughter in the dark, like we are living in very, very, it's always difficult times, but it feels very, very difficult. And we go on with our life. And I do think that poetry is looking all of that in the eye, and we have to be able to hold the beauty and the horror in some way. We kind of carry it, we bear it, and the poem allows you to do that. If you couldn't write a poem, I think if I couldn't write a poem, I would feel truly despairing. And so I do think that poetry is an intervention in some way. And it's not just about catharsis. It's not just, oh, I feel better. To go in and to change language and to ask, how do we look, to ask, how do we claim power, to kind of provide that, that bridge in some form.
I like the word intervention. I think that kind of sums it up very well. Which brings us to a poem which is actually a commission. Now, I'm always interested in how commissions sit within a collection, because occasionally you find, even without knowing it's a commission, when you read a poem, it feels slightly out of place or doesn't quite feel like it's the same thing as the rest of the book. And does it give you permission to stray from what you would normally write about or how you would normally write? Or does it give you the chance to explore something that interests you anyway, but in a new way?
I love commissions. I think that for me, it's again this area of play and playfulness and experimentation that I would do with a formal poem, like a sestina or a sonnet, or with a visual poem. And I feel like you're always going to find a way to write about the thing that you're going to write about, regardless. So I feel those pathways of how a poem gets to be are very mysterious and beautiful to me. And I do think that commissions are a way of play. But you're right, they don't always work for the larger body of things. So they don't always need to be in a collection. I think I remember having a conversation with a Mexican poet friend who just couldn't imagine writing a commission poem. And he just said, no way, it's so unnatural. What's wrong with you? For me, I feel I like the challenge, and, it's sort of usually just something comes out of it. Something comes out of writing. It's always an interesting process. So it's just nudging you in a particular way.
Yeah. So tell us about this poem, A Dress is Like a Field.
Yeah, this was for a book that Vogue magazine actually were putting together about dresses. I like clothes. I like frocks. I thought, okay, let me see where it goes, where this poem wanders off to. Weirdly, I was looking at these pictures of my sister and I growing up, and my mother made us matching little frocks because we couldn't buy ready-made clothes then so much. So she would get the material and she would make 2 frocks, one for me, one for my sister. And then I found a picture of my mother and her sister. And my mother is Welsh. She grew up in North Wales. And this was a picture of my mother and her younger sister in their backyard in North Wales, wearing these matching frocks.
Yeah.
So the poem started there. A dress is like a field. A dress is like a field. Lift a hem and flowers will fall. Fold it in a wooden chest, and weeds will lay their fingers against its cotton heart. A dress is sin. Take Marilyn. Take Subway Great. Take, you must have had to paint that on you. Flamenco ruffle, zipper, Cleopatra in gold lame, little black something. When we were girls, we played at dressing up. Mum's swimsuit with the built-in bosoms, a lesson in seduction. The past is a yard in Wales. My mother and her sister in matching seersucker frocks, hands in pockets, high collars, the wind making petticoats of their hair. They join a ship of sisters, mothers with needles and thread, holding bolts of cloth against their chests, thinking this will do, this will sail them across the years. A singer's sewing machine in Madras. My sister and I in handmade smocks with floral bibs and frills, aspiring zazoos with high socks and lacunas of knees. If I had daughters, I'd dress them in velvet suits with cummerbunds so they could roll down meadows and scorch the wilds of their insides against grass. A dress needs only a mosquito net to be a bride, and later, as it yellows in a bag, it will dream of being a factory girl, a school child, something lumpen and uniform, to recognize itself in the other. A dress never loses its sense of the dramatic. It knows how to languish across a washing line, how to beckon from a mannequin, how to sit puddled on a floor. See this river bank? There's a row of them, unbelted, unbuttoned. The river calls for an afternoon of love, a picnic, clots of copper maple, legs of bone, seams turned toward the sun. Nothing like abandoned shoes which glow with horror, the piles at Dachau, trains, gunshots, dead bodies in water. A dress is a forest of memory, its damask skin, its armpits of toil and wonder. Even the holes are altars to fairy tales, reminding you how once you were so small, once your waist was a secret nation.
It's so delightful. I love the way it begins with the childhood memories, and then halfway through, the dress itself becomes kind of embodied and dreaming of growing up and falling in love. Some of these phrases are just gorgeous. The wind making petticoats of her hair. I love that. And then later on, even the holes are altars to fairy tales, reminding you how once you were so small. It's so lovely.
Yeah. I think that if we come across these childhood things, or maybe even clothing that we wore in a different state, it's almost as if we just forget that we were those people and they seem so far from us. You just think, how did I ever fit into that, and this sense of the smallness, yeah, it's a magical thing. And for people who hold on to their clothes and who pass them on, I think also there's that sense of continuity, particularly I think with mothers and daughters.
Yeah.
History is also in those clothes.
Absolutely.
And then of course you think of history and it goes off into wider things.
Yeah. Dresses and forms of dress do appear a lot in the book. Sometimes as the means of protection or as boundaries, sometimes things to escape from. And I like the example you've just given where clothes can be handed down. We've only heard a fraction of the poems from A God at the Door. There are poems of cosmos, of extinction, of specific episodes, of the personal and the general, dreams, fantasy. And a word that came to mind for me when reading this was metaphysical. Would you call yourself a metaphysical poet, a 21st century metaphysical poet?
I'm not sure. I think, you read the thing at the beginning of the program, the little blurb about, I think poets are quite uncomfortable when anybody describes what they are, because I don't think we ever think of ourselves in that way.
No.
I would say that I am interested in the nature of reality, in the nature of existence, what our relationship in as individuals are to one another, but also to a larger cosmos, to the universe. And I'm really interested in how that's connected through the body, and how the body, in a way, is a kind of microcosm of the world outside, a container, again, as it were. I think a lot about what can't be explained. So there's definitely an idea of divinity, I feel, that I'm working towards, which is again very bodily felt. It's not something that is in the ether. It's not something that is out there, but it's in rocks and trees and in our own bodies and in the connections we make. But it's always this idea of something transcendental, this something outside of oneself, that the possibility that we can be multiple beings in our singularity. And so I think in all those ways, perhaps, I don't know if that what a metaphysical poet would be defined as, but
what sounds good enough to me.
those are concerns, and there's
course.
definitely this sense of what is our place. And I would say perhaps the feeling that I'm most interested in, not just as a poet, but as a reader of poems, as a person who goes to painting or film or any kind of art form, what I'm really interested in is in wonder. For me, the feeling of wonder is what it means to be alive, to experience wonder. For a poem to be able to do that, for a song to be able to do that, it is really a shift. Wonder can take you from this state of being into a completely other being. And how that happens, that mystery of that wonder, you can't manipulate it. I can't force you to feel a certain way when you read a poem, but that it happens, and that it has happened to all of us in some way or the other. Simple wonder. That's really what I'm interested in. And I think that's what keeps me hopeful as well, is the possibility of wonder.
Well, that's lovely. One of my favourite words, actually, wonder. So I'm very pleased to hear that. So, Tishani, this has been wonderful. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. And all the best for whatever you've got upcoming, which is probably lots of stuff. I haven't got time to ask you, but I can imagine.
Thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you, and I'm so glad to have had the chance to talk about poetry and all things poetic, so I can also find my own way back to poetry,
Excellent.
which I'm missing.
So, Tishani Doshi, what a lovely interview that was. She seems such a sort of complete person with, this whole other life of being an academic and also a dancer.
Yeah.
You said you were looking at one of her dances online and it was really impressive.
Yeah, no, she really is an impressive person, multi-talented. And I love this idea of embodying the poems in this very physical performance. She really commands the space, and her body is so flexible. We talked about tightly controlled rage in the poems, and she's able to express that through her body as well, which I thought was really, really interesting.
It interests me when people are professional at something else, artistic as well as poetry.
Yeah.
I wonder if, being so in control of your own body in that way, does that mean that you have more control in your thoughts, and control is something that you do as part of your creative process? Because I really admired the way that she was talking about listening to and reading news stories, but the sort of controlled way that she then selected 2 or 3 of those and then wove them into a new whole that was full of, like you said, sort of controlled anger and strength and quite remorseless. I got the feeling of just a lovely suppleness of language and a magnificent control of her story.
Yeah. It was interesting what she said about using form. That, of course, lends itself to tightly controlling the material and being within certain boundaries.
You said there was a poem that's like a pair of Speedos or
That's
something.
right. She mentioned that, didn't she? Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the book, as I said at the end, we only really scraped the surface because these poems are so rich. They are just so dense, and many of them are quite long. The small ones stand out, I suppose, because of that. I'm looking at one that's called I Carry My Uterus in a Small Suitcase, the first line of the poem, and it's just a little upside down triangular uterus shaped poem of 8 lines, I think. And the Speedo poem, yes, that's in a kind of a triangular shape, but it's kind of broader at the top, so more like a pair of pants, I suppose.
There's a lovely playfulness, isn't there?
Playfulness, yeah, that's a really good word for it. There's another poem called Advice for Pliny the Elder, Big Daddy of Mansplainers. So you sort of want to jump in. You read that title and you think, I want to read that poem now.
The poems she read, I never felt like I was being finger-wagged at as a male reader. I thought they were amazing and creating an indignant feeling in you.
Yeah.
In I Found a Village, and in it were all our missing women. That idea of like 21 million women have been disenfranchised from voting. Yeah. And that being roughly the population of Sri Lanka.
And then that parallel story of women working in the fields having to undergo hysterectomy so that they don't lose time in work. I mean, it's absolutely...
That's grotesque.
Absolutely grotesque. Somehow, you say, she tackles these subjects. She draws attention to these things, but by using irony and very clever metaphors and juxtapositions of these stories. At the end of it, you don't realise that you've really been hit over the head with this. You think, oh my God, but it hasn't felt like it at the time.
I read that title, I Found a Village, and in it were all our missing women. It's almost like the beginning of a joke or something. There is a kind of vein of surrealism or that kind of unconscious or subconscious connection of images. The poem tells itself to a certain extent.
Yeah, but that puts a gloss over the extreme amount of craft and work that's gone into these.
I love that poem, Tiger Woman.
Yeah.
I always get fascinated by minor characters in plays and things and people with walk-on parts.
Yes.
And she brings that minor character centre stage in this. Like you, I just Googled the painting. Yeah. Strange image, isn't it? Because it's mostly like a tigerish body with a woman's head and 2 men sort of in the corner of the painting.
You can see the body of this chimera, this creature under the water, but the men on the bank can't see that. And she really digs into that idea. Very clever.
She said at one point that poetry ultimately is an optimistic act. So even when you're reading a poem entitled We Will Not Kill You, We'll Just Shoot You in the Vagina, which is a kind of twisted joke from this Duarte guy that was president of the Philippines. Yeah. She's turned this into a positive act of affirmation of women, and it's just...
absolutely.
There is an optimism about her work.
I think so, definitely.
Reading her, you feel like she thinks her poems can make a difference. There isn't this sense of poetry, after all, makes nothing happen. You know, I don't get that with her. I get the feeling that she thinks her poems can make a difference, and it's really exhilarating.
I haven't got the words to tell you how rich this book is and how many subjects she tackles, and it's really amazing.
I think she's such an accomplished writer. I didn't know her work.
I think I came across her possibly in Poetry Review, or I think when she was up for an award, but certainly when I bought this book, I was blown away by it, I have to say. So recommended.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of hoo-ha about AI recently amongst authors. I know the Society of Authors are very exercised about it. What do you think about it all, Peter?
Well, I've been trying to find out a bit about it, and I've actually been using it a little bit. I'm one of those people that are very polite to their Alexa chatbot things, just in case the robots take over.
You will say please and thank you.
So anyway, I thought I'd try it out and learn a bit about what's been going on with it. So I first used it about 6 months ago as a kind of proofing tool. So there's a story I've got coming out in a couple of months that I was writing last year, and I just bunged bits of it in, section by section, and said, will you proof this?
Mm.
And I didn't agree with everything, but it was quite a functional tool, and one or two of its suggestions I accepted.
Mm.
But one of the times I did that, it not only proofed it, but then started writing the next few paragraphs of this story.
That's a bit uppity of it, isn't it?
Well, yeah, really. But it was so weird because what it then supplied was absolutely clunkingly awful. And it made very intelligent responses to what I'd given it. But then when it started going freelance, it was just really childish and obvious. On that note, my lovely stepdaughter and her partner bought me a book for Christmas called Artificial Nightmares, a collection of AI-created horror stories. It seems to be an Amazon self-published thing. And there's no name on it from a human or anybody claiming responsibility. The standard of the writing is just as what I found when I was suddenly spontaneously generated text. I'll just give you a few sentences to reassure our listeners that they're not about to take over. So, there's a few sentences from the first story. I didn't get beyond the first story, called The First Victim. Tyler flicked his cigarette to the ground and stomped it out. I heard something weird was going on in town, wanted to check it out. You want to come with? Jack hesitated for a moment. He didn't like the idea of getting involved with anything weird, but he also didn't want to let Tyler go alone. All right, he said finally. What's going on? Tyler shrugged. Not sure. Some people have gone missing. The cops aren't doing anything about it, so I figured we could try to find out what's going on. Jack nodded, feeling a bit uneasy. They started walking down the street looking for any signs of trouble. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon an old, dilapidated house, and Tyler's eyes lit up. This looks promising, he said, and started making his way towards it. And that's one of the good bits. So it's just like, it's so clunky and just, non-believable with zero sense of anything in terms of personality or language play or...
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's kind of quite reassuring. Although I think whoever got this collection together, the idea of writing horror stories to then play on people's nervousness about AI.
Very self-referential, yes, very postmodern.
Moving on, the use I found for ChatGPT, occasionally I've asked it questions. I've asked it, tell me all you know about the Planet Poetry podcast. And it came up with who we were and, a bit about the podcast, almost as if it had written a little manifesto for us. And I thought, blimey, yeah, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
But recently, I've been using it as a reader. So at the moment, I happen to be writing some unusually long poems for me. The first one was about 100 lines long, and I put it in there a few months ago and said, can you tell me what you think this is about? And then in 2 seconds, it gave me a breakdown of all the themes and a real kind of analysis of what I'd written. I sort of read its comments and thought, actually, what I was trying to say, this kind of robot reader has picked up on and can see and articulate very clearly. So it made me think, well, that's quite useful feedback.
Yeah.
But then right at the end, there were a few suggestions about how I might improve it. And these were just hopeless. But as a kind of holding a mirror up to what you've written and seeing if it's understood, then it's really good.
Could be a useful tool in some respects, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. And as things exist at the moment, I'm not saying it doesn't have any threat in the future or whatever. So I asked this chat GPT to explain itself and how it works, and it pumped out a sort of answer with 3 bullet points, which were about learning from text and generating responses, improving over time. But it summarised it at the end, saying, in short, chat GPT is like a very smart tool that can chat with you, answer questions, and even help with creative or technical tasks by using patterns from the text it has studied. I think creative people need to engage with it. I don't think we're anywhere near at the moment it being able to replicate a poet or their way of thinking, but it's just part of current reality. So I think it's interesting to sort of get to grips with it.
It definitely is. I mean, a few things occur as you were talking there, Peter. I mean, first of all, the clunkiness of the prose that it produced.
Yeah.
I've read worse prose than that by actual people.
Oh, yes.
And then you think, okay, is it good for collating news, for spreading information? But of course, then you've got the issue of what is the provenance? My concern, I suppose, is that because already on Google, the very first answer that comes up is a summary, an AI summary of that topic. And sometimes you think, oh, that's useful. I'll just take this. And then you realize, hang on a minute. Why is it saying this? Oh, because it's been to all these dodgy websites and it's spouting as truth and fact stuff that actually is not necessarily at all. So it takes away the human capacity to distinguish between what's good and what's bad sources of information. And I suppose the same way in art, it's regurgitating stories in the style of badly written fiction. And I don't think there's any way for an AI system to have any sense of human discernment. And the description of what it does that you read out, its own description of how it learns and what it can do, sounds very much like, to me, I hate to bang on about it, but what was going on in AI 40 years ago. And I don't know how much further it's come on. It looks so much more advanced because of the language capabilities that it seems to have. I'm skeptical, but like you, I'm also realistic. It's there. Let's make the most of it, but understand its limitations.
It's sort of recognizing patterns in language and then just using those. So it's not really...
It's not intelligence as such.
It's a pattern recognition. Yeah. In terms of poetry, I think it can do all the stuff except for the poetry, and I think actually poets might be... Well, I'm hoping poets can be sheltered from this because, the thing it lacks is the actual bit that is the poetry.
Maybe. It's so subjective, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's to say that someone may not see poetry in something written by a robot?
Yeah.
And others wouldn't. I don't know. But I rather like the idea of this anonymous AI generated an entire book of stories. Is it going to be the anon of the future?
I think in terms of the visual world, it's already opening up new vistas. Perhaps we should talk about some stuff done by humans now.
Well, I've just been reading a couple of books from Sidekick. I have to say this very clearly because if I say it quickly, it sounds like psychic. But Sidekick, a small press run by Kirsten Irving and John Stone. Two creatives who've collaborated on many things over the years. In fact, I remember a long time, maybe 15 years ago, I remember I subscribed to a sort of a handmade zine that they used to produce. I can't remember what it's called now for the life of me, but it was just so funny and it would arrive in the post together with a fridge magnet or a mixtape or something. And it was all really interesting and hybrid. And that's kind of what Sidekick specializes in, I think. Beautifully produced, really lovely to handle. And the two books I ordered from them, one is called You Again, a book of love-hate stories.
Okay.
And it's a mix of poetry, text, found text, classic text, extracts from real books and stuff that's been reinterpreted by contemporary writers. And that was interesting. And then I moved on to Bad Kid Catullus.
Oh.
It's not a new book. I think it's published in 2017, but it's new to me. And it's just this fantastic conglomeration of Catullus's poems and people's responses to them. I'll read what it says on the back because it summarizes it. Gaius Valerius Catullus was ancient Rome's most notorious scandalmonger, filth-smith, love that word, filth-smith and lovelorn wretch. In this interactive handbook, his famously sexy, savage, tender and scurrilous poems have been transformed and mutated in myriad ways, compressed, expanded, bricolaged, Catullus in 6 pulp genres, Catullus's playlist, even a Catullus Kama Sutra. And then there are pages for you, the reader, to fill in your own obscene fashion. So it's just like,
Have you been busy with that then, Robin?
I've not written anything in it yet, but it's so hilarious. Every now and again, it's this blank page and it tells you what you're supposed to do.
So are there actual Catullus poems in there?
Oh, yes, there are, in the Latin. And interestingly, it took me back to my school days. We had this Latin teacher who, I didn't realise it at the time, but looking back, she was funny. Trouble is, all the set texts were stuff about Hannibal crossing the Alps with his elephants, taking part in the Punic Wars, and it didn't really get us going. And so she brought in some Catullus. He wrote these short, explicit poems. One of the famous ones is number 5. This gives you an idea. It's quite short. This is the translation by Francis Ware Cornish, the 1904 translation, which I'm sure this was the translation we were given at school because it's all very correct, but not too sexy.
Yeah.
Let us live, my Lesbia, and love, and value at 1 farthing all the talk of crabbed old men. Suns may set and rise again. For us, when the short light has once set, remains to be slept the sleep of one unbroken night. Give me 1,000 kisses, then 100, then another 1,000, then a second 100, then yet another 1,000, then 100. Then, when we have made up many thousands, we will confuse our counting, that we may not know the reckoning, nor any malicious person blight them with evil eye, when he knows that our kisses are so many. See, what could be offensive about that?
Very mild for Catullus.
Very mild, I know. This is a poem in response to Catullus 7, and it's called Carmina Sutra, Position 7, The Waterfall, by John Stone. How many, as in to sate me, to overwhelm me? Oh, I don't know. Let's say about as many as there are itty grains of sand tucked between Jupiter's sweaty oracle and old Battus's holy catacomb. Or say, as many as the spying, prying, pinprick stars in a soundless night, gazing down on all these steamy, sweet hookups in the streets and houses. Yeah, that seems the right amount to me. Mad old Catullus. More kisses than you can count. More than you can curse. Just gives you a sort of flavour of it. But there's all kinds of stuff in here.
That's cool. And visually appealing too.
Visually appealing, endlessly creative, and even the biogs of the contributing poets are all written in a kind of Roman style. They've translated the names of people's birthplaces, you know, so Milton Keynes becomes Deventio Quantor or something. I don't know. All the poems are in the Latin as well. So
bilingual text, is it?
Yeah. You've got the Latin text, and then you've got the various either responses to it or different translations. Or someone has created a face out of some words.
Oh, wow.
Posters. We've got a Lesbia mixtape there. It tells you what's on it. There's some photos of some actual wall paintings from Pompeii and stuff. Yeah, very inventive and great fun. And I think Sidekick Books, I think they specialise in this kind of thing. So definitely worth a look. Kirsten and John, stuff they get up to is nuts, basically.
Oh, yeah, but really creative.
Oh, nuts in an excellent way, yeah.
Yeah.